The wind howled through the Wyoming territory with a viciousness that could strip the flesh from bone, and Quinn Yates knew he was likely riding toward his death. February of 1878 had brought the worst winter storms the territory had seen in decades. And here he was, 3 days' ride from White River, with nothing but his horse, his rifle, and a single wool blanket that had seen better days. The cattle drive he'd been part of had scattered when the blizzard hit, and now he was alone, following what he hoped was the trail back to civilization. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Dusty, pressed forward through snow that reached her knees. Quinn kept his head down against the wind, his hat pulled low, though it did little good. The cold had worked its way through his leather coat and into his bones hours ago. He'd lost feeling in his toes sometime around noon, and the sun was already starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the endless white landscape in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful if they weren't so terrifying. He just crested a small rise when he saw her. At first, Quinn thought it was a trick of the fading light, maybe a dead tree or a rock formation. But as Dusty picked her way down the slope, he realized it was a person, curled against the base of an outcropping, covered in snow. His heart hammered as he urged his horse closer. The figure wasn't moving. Quinn dismounted, his legs nearly buckling when his boots hit the ground. He stumbled through the drifts and dropped to his knees beside the person. Brushing away the snow with numb fingers, he found a woman, native, probably Shoshone or Arapaho from the beadwork on what remained of her doeskin dress. Her lips were blue, her skin like ice when he touched her neck to check for a pulse. For a terrible moment he thought he was too late, but then he felt it, faint and slow, but there, she was alive. Barely, Quinn looked around wildly. There was nothing out here, no shelter, no help coming. The sun was sinking fast, and the temperature would drop even further once it disappeared. He had maybe an hour of usable light left, and he needed to make a decision, his blanket. It was the only thing keeping him from freezing to death himself, but she had nothing. Her clothes were torn, soaked through, completely inadequate for this weather. Without help, she'd be dead within the hour. Maybe less. "Come on, don't do this to me," Quinn muttered to himself, already knowing what he was going to do. His ma had raised him right, even if she hadn't lived to see him grow into a man. She'd always said that the measure of a person wasn't what they did when it was easy, but what they did when it cost them something. This was going to cost him everything. He pulled the blanket from Dusty's back where he'd draped it for an extra layer of warmth and wrapped it around the woman's frozen body. She didn't stir, didn't acknowledge his presence at all. He tried to lift her, grunting with effort. She was light, too light, probably half-starved, but in his weakened state it took everything he had to get her across Dusty's saddle. "Easy, girl," he murmured to his horse, who shifted nervously. I know, but we can't leave her." He spotted a cluster of rocks about 50 yards to the east that might provide some windbreak. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Leading Dusty by the reins, Quinn trudged through the snow toward them, each step harder than the last. Without his blanket, the wind cut through him like knives. His teeth chattered so hard he bit his tongue, tasting blood. The rocks formed a rough semicircle, and he managed to get the woman down into the small protected space. She slumped against the stone, still unconscious. Quinn tried to gather some sagebrush for a fire, but everything was buried or wet. His hands were shaking too badly to work his flint and steel anyway. He sat down next to her, pulling his coat tighter, though it was useless. Dusty stood nearby, her head low, her breath coming out in great clouds of steam. The sky was darkening rapidly, stars beginning to appear in the deep blue overhead. It would have been peaceful if it weren't so deadly. "Hey," Quinn said, his voice hoarse. He nudged the woman gently. "Can you hear me? You need to wake up." Nothing. He tried again, more forcefully. "Come on now, don't you die on me, not after I gave up my blanket for you." Still nothing. Her breathing was shallow, her face peaceful. Quinn realized she might never wake up. And now he'd die right alongside her, two frozen corpses that wouldn't be found until spring thaw. The thought should have terrified him, but Quinn felt strangely calm. At least he'd tried. At least he'd done the right thing. That had to count for something. He must have drifted off, because the next thing he knew, someone was shaking him. Quinn opened his eyes to find it was full dark, the moon rising over the horizon. The woman was awake, her dark eyes wide as she stared at him. She was saying something, but his mind was too foggy to make sense of it. She grabbed his face with both hands, and he was surprised to find her skin was warm. How was she warm? She pulled his blanket around both of them, pressing close to him. Quinn tried to protest, to push it back to her, but she was surprisingly strong. She held him tight, sharing the meager warmth. "SHH," she whispered, and he understood that at least. Her breath was warm against his ear. "Be still. Rest." Quinn wanted to argue, wanted to make sure she kept the blanket, but his body had other ideas. The small amount of warmth seeping into him from her proximity, and the shared blanket, was enough to send him spiraling into unconsciousness. His last coherent thought was wondering how she'd recovered so quickly, and whether they'd both be dead by morning. He woke to sunlight on his face and the smell of smoke. For a moment, Quinn couldn't remember where he was or how he'd gotten there. Then it all came flooding back. The storm, the woman, the blanket. He sat up with a gasp, looking around wildly. She was there, crouched beside a small fire, feeding it pieces of dried sagebrush. She'd somehow found enough dry fuel to keep it going. His blanket was draped over a rock, steaming as it dried in the heat. Dusty was nearby, pawing at the snow to reach the grass underneath. And he was alive. They were both alive. The woman looked up when she heard him move. In the daylight, he could see her more clearly. She was probably close to his age, mid-20s, with long black hair that hung in a braid over one shoulder. Her face was angular, beautiful in a fierce way with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. Her eyes were the color of dark honey, and they studied him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "You are awake," she said in English, her accent thick but her words clear. "Good, I was worried." Quinn tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. She handed him a piece of bark with snow melted into water. He drank gratefully, the cold liquid painful on his raw throat. "How?" he managed to croak. "You were dying." "So were you," she replied simply. "The blanket saved us both." Body heat through the night, and I found some fuel for fire when it was light enough to search. Quinn looked at the fire, then at her, then at himself. He'd survived. Against all odds, they'd both survived. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, as if deciding whether to trust him. Finally, she said, "Galena. Galena Brighthawk." "Quinn Yates," he replied, offering his hand. She looked at it for a moment before taking it in a firm grip. Her palm was calloused, the hand of someone used to hard work. "Why did you do it?" Galena asked, releasing his hand. "Give me your blanket." "You nearly died." Quinn shrugged, uncomfortable with the directness of the question. "Couldn't just leave you there. Many men would have." "Then many men are fools," Quinn said. "My ma always said we're all in this together, doesn't matter what we look like or where we come from." She'd have done the same. Something shifted in Galena's expression, a softness that hadn't been there before. "Your mother was wise." "She was," Quinn agreed quietly. "She passed when I was 15. Fever took her." "I am sorry," Galena said, and she sounded like she meant it. "My mother also walks with the ancestors, 3 winters ago. Smallpox." They sat in silence for a moment, two strangers bonded by loss and survival. The fire crackled between them, and Quinn realized he was actually starting to feel warm again, almost human. "What happened to you?" he asked. "How did you end up out here alone?" Galena's face darkened. "Raiders. White men, though not like you. They came to our camp 5 days ago. We had moved away from the reservation, seeking better hunting. My father is sick, and the reservation has no food, no medicine. These men, they wanted to take the women. My sister, me. The warriors fought them off, but in the chaos my horse bolted. I tried to hold on, but she threw me. I walked for 2 days before the storm caught me. I thought I would die. I should have died, but you found me." Quinn felt anger burning in his chest. He'd heard stories of raiders, outlaws who preyed on native camps because they knew there'd be no justice, no one to come after them. It made him sick. "Your people," he said carefully. "Do you know where they are?" Galena nodded. "We were camped near the Wind River, about a day's ride north, if they did not move because of the storm." "I can take you there," Quinn offered, "soon as the weather holds and we're both strong enough to ride." She studied him again with those intense eyes. "Why would you do this?" "You do not know me. My people, some would say you have done enough." "Some would say I haven't done nearly enough," Quinn replied. "Besides, I'm heading back toward White River anyway. Wind River isn't too far out of the way." That was a lie, and they both knew it. Wind River was well to the north and White River was southeast, but Galena didn't call him on it. Instead, she reached into a small pouch at her waist and pulled out a piece of dried meat. "Elk," she said, offering him half. "I had a little left." Quinn took it gratefully, his stomach growling. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten. They shared the meat in silence, and Quinn marveled at how quickly things could change. Yesterday he'd been alone, convinced he was going to die. Now he had company, a purpose, and maybe even a chance at survival. They rested through the day, taking turns feeding the fire and keeping watch. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear, brutally cold sky. By late afternoon, Quinn felt strong enough to stand and move around. His toes were painful as feeling returned to them, but he didn't think he'd lost anything to frostbite. Galena seemed to be recovering even faster, moving with a grace that spoke of a lifetime spent in harsh conditions. As the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink, Galena came and sat beside him. She'd been quiet for the past hour, and Quinn had left her to her thoughts. "Quinn Yates," she said formally, and he turned to look at her. "You saved my life. This is a debt I cannot repay with words alone." "You don't owe me anything," Quinn started, but she held up a hand. "Please, let me speak." She took a breath, her expression serious. "Among my people, the Arapaho, when someone saves your life, you are bonded to them, connected. I know your people do not have this custom, but it is important to me. I would like to offer you something in return for what you have given me." Quinn felt uncomfortable. "Really, you don't have to." "I know I do not have to," Galena said patiently. "I want to. When we reach my people, I will ask my father to grant you safe passage in our lands. And I would like to teach you some of our ways, survival skills that might help you in the future. So that next time you are caught in a storm, you will know how to build a proper shelter, how to find food and fuel even in winter." "I'd like that," Quinn said, meaning it. "Thank you." "No," Galena said softly. "Thank you for seeing me as a person worth saving." There was something in the way she said it that made Quinn's chest tighten. He wanted to tell her that, of course, she was worth saving, that any decent person would have done the same, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he just nodded, and they sat together watching the sunset, two survivors against all odds. They set out the next morning, both riding Dusty. The horse wasn't pleased about the double load, but she was sturdy and game, and she carried them without complaint. Galena sat behind Quinn, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance, and he tried not to think about how aware he was of her presence. The warmth of her body pressed against his back. The landscape was beautiful in its starkness, endless white plains broken by rocky outcroppings, and the occasional stand of trees. Galena directed them north, her sense of direction unerring even in the featureless terrain. They rode through the day, stopping occasionally to rest Dusty and check their bearings. As they traveled, Galena told him about her people, her family. Her father, Running Elk, was a respected elder, though illness had weakened him. Her sister, Mourning Dove, was 18, newly married to a young warrior named Swift Arrow. Her older brother, Black Bear, had been killed fighting the cavalry 5 years ago, defending their camp during the forced relocation to the reservation. "We are not enemies," Galena said quietly as they rode. "We only want to live as we always have, but the government does not see it that way." Quinn didn't know what to say to that. He'd seen enough in his travels to know that the native people were getting a raw deal, pushed off their lands, herded onto reservations where they were left to starve. It wasn't right, but it also wasn't something one cowboy could fix. "I'm sorry," he said finally, because it seemed inadequate but necessary. "You are different," Galena said, "than most white men I have met. You see people, not enemies. My ma used to say that hate was a poison you drink yourself while hoping someone else dies from it," Quinn replied. "Never saw the point in it." He felt Galena's arms tighten slightly around his waist, and he wondered what she was thinking. They made camp that night in a sheltered valley, and Quinn watched with interest as Galena showed him how to properly build a winter shelter. She found willow branches and bent them into a small dome frame, then packed snow around and over it, leaving a small entrance. Inside, she lined the floor with pine boughs she'd stripped from nearby trees. "The snow insulates," she explained as she worked. "It traps heat inside. And the pine keeps you off the frozen ground." Quinn helped as best he could, following her instructions. By the time they were done, the small shelter was remarkably warm inside, especially once they got a fire going at the entrance. They ate more of Galena's dried elk, supplemented by some pine nuts she'd gathered, and Quinn felt more hopeful than he had in days. "You're a good teacher," he said as they sat by the fire. Galena smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "And you are a good student, quick to learn." "Had to be," Quinn said. "Been on my own since I was 15. My pa, he died before I was born. Wagon accident. Ma did her best, but after she passed, I had to figure things out fast." "You have done well," Galena said. "You are alive. You are strong. This is more than many can say." They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their lives. Quinn told her about his years working cattle drives, the places he'd seen, the people he'd met. Galena spoke of her childhood, learning to ride and hunt alongside her brother, the old ways that were slowly being forgotten as her people were forced onto reservations and told to farm instead of hunt. "You have a woman?" Galena asked suddenly, and Quinn nearly choked on the water he was drinking. "What? No, I don't," he stammered. "Never really stayed in one place long enough." "That is sad," Galena said matter-of-factly. "Everyone should have someone. Life is too hard to face alone. What about you?" Quinn asked, turning the question back on her. "Do you have a husband?" Galena shook her head. "There was a man 2 years ago, strong warrior, good hunter. But he wanted a wife who would stay in the camp, tend the lodge, have babies. I wanted more. I wanted to hunt, to ride, to be free. We did not agree. He married someone else." "Do you regret it?" Quinn asked. She considered the question seriously. "No, I think we both found what we needed. He has a wife who makes him happy, and I have my freedom, though my father worries. He says I am getting old, that I should choose someone before I have no choices left." Quinn wanted to say that 20-something wasn't old, that she had plenty of time, but he knew that in her world things were different. And in his world too, really. Most women were married by 20, starting families. He was an oddity himself, a man of 26 with no wife, no home, nothing but a horse and the clothes on his back. "Maybe you just haven't met the right person yet," he said quietly. Galena looked at him across the fire and something passed between them, some unspoken acknowledgement that Quinn didn't quite know how to name. Then she smiled again and stood. "We should sleep. Tomorrow will be another long ride." They settled into the shelter, the blanket spread over both of them for warmth, lying side by side in the small space. It was intimate but innocent, born of necessity rather than desire. Still, Quinn was intensely aware of her beside him, the sound of her breathing, the warmth of her body. He was in trouble, he realized. He was starting to care about this woman, this fierce, beautiful, impossible woman who he'd only known for 2 days. It was foolish. They came from different worlds, different lives. Once he got her safely back to her people, they'd go their separate ways, and that would be the end of it. But as he drifted off to sleep, lulled by the warmth and the exhaustion, Quinn couldn't help but wish things could be different. They reached the Wind River area late the next afternoon. Galena had been growing more tense as they traveled, scanning the landscape constantly. Quinn understood why. If her people had moved or if something had happened to them, they might never find the camp, but her instincts proved true. As they crested a ridge overlooking the river valley, they spotted smoke rising from a cluster of lodges nestled among the trees. Galena let out a sound of relief and joy, and Quinn felt her tension melt away. "They are still here," she said. They waited. As they descended toward the camp, riders appeared, warriors on horseback who'd been keeping watch. They surrounded Quinn and Galena quickly, weapons ready, faces hard. One of them called out in Arapaho, and Galena responded rapidly in the same language. Quinn kept his hands visible, and his posture non-threatening, very aware that he was one man against a dozen armed warriors who had every reason to distrust him. The conversation went on for several minutes, Galena's voice growing more insistent. Finally, one of the warriors, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, nodded and gestured toward the camp. They were allowed to proceed, though the warriors stayed close, clearly not willing to trust Quinn until they heard the full story. The camp was larger than Quinn had expected, maybe 40 lodges arranged in loose circles. People emerged as they rode in, women and children and elders, all staring at the unusual sight of Galena returning with a white cowboy. Galena dismounted as soon as they reached the center of the camp, and Quinn followed more slowly, very aware of all the eyes on him. An old woman rushed forward with a cry, embracing Galena tightly. They spoke rapidly in Arapaho, the old woman touching Galena's face, her hair, as if to reassure herself that she was real. A younger woman joined them, tears streaming down her face, and Quinn guessed this was the sister, Mourning Dove. Then an older man emerged from one of the larger lodges. He moved slowly, leaning on a walking stick, his face lined with age and illness. But his eyes were sharp as they fixed on Quinn, measuring him. This had to be the father, Running Elk. Galena broke away from the women and went to him, speaking urgently in Arapaho. She gestured to Quinn several times, and he caught his own name in the flow of unfamiliar words. The old man listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Galena finished, Running Elk was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice deep and surprisingly strong. Galena translated. "My father says you are welcome in our camp, Quinn Yates. Any man who would risk his life for one of our people is a friend. You will stay with us, eat with us, rest. You have earned this honor." "Thank you," Quinn said, inclining his head respectfully. "I'm grateful for your hospitality." The tension in the camp eased somewhat, though Quinn could still feel the wariness in the air. He understood. He was still a white man, and white men had brought nothing but pain and loss to these people. One kind act didn't erase years of violence and broken promises, but Galena's family, at least, seemed willing to give him a chance. The old woman, who he learned was called Gentle Rain and was Running Elk's wife, insisted on feeding him. She brought him into their lodge, a warm space with a fire burning in the center and sleeping furs arranged around the edges. Quinn sat where she indicated, and she pressed a bowl of stew into his hands. It was delicious, rich with meat and wild onions, and he ate gratefully while Galena continued to talk with her family. He caught pieces of the conversation, translated by Galena when she remembered he couldn't understand. They were asking about what happened, where she'd been, if she was hurt. She told them the story, her voice soft but clear, and Quinn felt uncomfortable as she described how he'd given her his blanket, how it had saved them both. "You are a good man," Gentle Rain said to him in halting English. "Thank you for bringing our daughter home." "She would have done the same," Quinn replied, and Galena smiled at him from across the fire. That night, Quinn was given a place to sleep in Running Elk's lodge, a position of honor that wasn't lost on him. He lay on the soft furs, warm and full for the first time in days, and listened to the sounds of the camp settling in for the night. Galena was on the other side of the lodge, talking quietly with her sister. Their voices were soothing, familiar tones that spoke of love and comfort. Quinn knew he should leave soon. He'd done what he set out to do, got Galena safely back to her people. He needed to get back to White River, back to his life. But as he drifted off to sleep, he found himself hoping for just a little more time, a few more days in this place with these people. With her, the next morning Galena woke him early. "Come," she said. "I want to show you something." Quinn followed her out of the lodge and through the quiet camp. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They walked to the edge of the camp where the horses were kept in a makeshift corral. Galena whistled softly, and a paint mare came trotting over, clearly her horse. "This is Running Wind," Galena said, stroking the mare's nose. "She came back yesterday, just before you arrived." The storm scattered many of the horses, but they are finding their way home. "She's beautiful," Quinn said, admiring the mare's coloring. "I have been thinking," Galena said, not looking at him. "About what comes next." Quinn's chest tightened. "I should probably head out soon." "Don't want to overstay my welcome." "That is not what I meant," Galena said quickly. She finally turned to face him, her expression uncertain in a way he hadn't seen before. "I told you I wanted to teach you survival skills, ways of my people. This takes time, more than a day or two." "Galena, I don't think stay," she said simply. "For a while. My father has given permission. He thinks it would be good for the people to see that not all white men are enemies, and I would like to fulfill my promise to you, to repay the debt I owe." Quinn wanted to say yes more than anything. But he also knew it was dangerous, this pull he felt toward her. The longer he stayed, the harder it would be to leave. "Please," Galena added, and that single word broke his resolve. "Okay," Quinn said. "I'll stay, for a little while." The smile that broke across her face was worth any pain that might come later. Over the next weeks, Quinn learned more than he'd thought possible. Galena was a patient and thorough teacher, showing him how to track game in winter, how to find water under ice, how to build different types of shelters depending on the terrain and weather. She taught him about plants, which ones were safe to eat and which would heal various ailments. She even began teaching him Arapaho, though Quinn struggled with the unfamiliar sounds. But it wasn't just survival skills. Quinn found himself learning about the Arapaho culture, their beliefs, their way of seeing the world. Running Elk, despite his illness, often sat with Quinn in the evenings, telling stories of the old days, of how things were before the white settlers came. He spoke without bitterness, simply sharing history, and Quinn listened with a growing sense of shame at what his people had done. He also grew closer to Galena's family. Gentle Rain treated him like a son, always making sure he was fed and warm. Mourning Dove and her husband, Swift Arrow, were friendly if a bit reserved, and Running Elk seemed to approve of him, though the old man was hard to read. But it was with Galena that Quinn spent most of his time. They rode together, hunted together, talked for hours by the fire. He learned about her dreams, her fears, her fierce love for her people and their way of life. She learned about his wandering existence, his loneliness, his search for something he couldn't quite name. And slowly, Quinn realized he was falling in love with her. It wasn't a sudden thing, no lightning bolt moment. It was gradual, like the changing of seasons. It was in the way she laughed at his terrible attempts to speak Arapaho, the way she moved with unconscious grace and strength, the way she looked at him sometimes, like she was seeing something no one else had ever noticed. The way his chest tightened when she smiled, the way his day felt empty when she wasn't near. He tried to fight it. This was impossible. He was a white cowboy with nothing to offer. She was Arapaho, tied to her people and their land. There was no future here, no way for this to work. But the heart, Quinn was learning, didn't care much about logic. One evening, about 3 weeks after they'd arrived at the camp, Quinn was helping repair one of the lodges when Swift Arrow approached him. The young warrior had been distant but not unfriendly, and Quinn had respected his space. "Quinn Yates," Swift Arrow said in careful English. "May I speak with you?" "Of course," Quinn said, setting down the leather he'd been working with. Swift Arrow was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You care for Galena," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Quinn felt his face heat. "I respect her very much. She's a good teacher and a good friend." "You misunderstand me," Swift Arrow said. "I do not ask as a warning. I ask because I am Mourning Dove's husband, and Mourning Dove is Galena's sister, and we have both seen the way you look at each other." Quinn didn't know what to say to that. "It doesn't matter," he said finally. "I'll be leaving soon anyway." "Will you?" Swift Arrow asked. "You have been here 3 weeks. You keep saying you will leave soon, but you do not go, and Galena, she is different with you, softer, happier." "I have not seen her like this before." "What are you saying?" Quinn asked, almost afraid of the answer. "I am saying that if your feelings are true, if you honor her and her ways, then perhaps you should speak with Running Elk. He is a wise man. He will know what is right." "I can't ask her to leave her people," Quinn said. "And I can't stay here permanently. I'm not Arapaho. I don't belong." "Belonging is not about blood," Swift Arrow said quietly. "It is about heart and choice. Think about what I have said." He walked away, leaving Quinn sitting there with his mind whirling. Was it possible? Could there actually be a way forward? That night, Quinn couldn't sleep. He lay in the lodge, staring up at the smoke hole, watching the stars through the opening. Everyone else was asleep, the only sound the occasional pop from the dying fire. He heard movement and turned his head to see Galena sitting up, wrapped in her fur blanket. She caught his eye and gestured toward the entrance. Quinn nodded and followed her out into the cold night air. The camp was quiet, everyone else asleep. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the snow. Galena led him away from the lodges to a spot by the river where they could see the water moving under the ice. "You are troubled," she said. It wasn't a question. "Swift Arrow talked to me today," Quinn said. "He said some things that got me thinking." "He told me he was going to," Galena replied. "Mourning Dove put him up to it. She is not subtle, my sister." Galena, Quinn started, then stopped. He didn't know how to say what he was feeling. She waited patiently, her face turned up to the moonlight. "I'm falling in love with you," Quinn finally said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know I shouldn't be. I know it's impossible, but I can't help it. You're the bravest, strongest, most amazing person I've ever met, and every day I spend here I fall a little deeper, and I don't know what to do about it." Galena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you think you are the only one feeling this way?" Quinn's breath caught. "What?" "I've been trying to fight it too," Galena said softly. "Telling myself it is foolish, that it cannot work, but my heart does not listen. Quinn Yates, you are different from any man I have known. You see me as I am, not as you wish me to be. You respect my strength instead of fearing it. When I am with you, I feel like I can be fully myself." "Then what do we do?" Quinn asked. "How do we make this work?" "I do not know," Galena admitted. "But I know that I do not want you to leave, not yet, maybe not ever." Quinn reached out and took her hand. Even in the cold, her skin was warm. "I don't want to leave either." They stood there for a long time, hands joined, looking out at the frozen river and the moonlit landscape. The impossibility of their situation hadn't changed, but somehow, knowing that she felt the same way made everything seem less daunting. "We should talk to my father," Galena said eventually. "Tomorrow, tell him the truth, see what he says." "He might tell me to leave," Quinn pointed out. "He might," Galena agreed. "But my father is wise, and he cares about my happiness. We must trust in that." They walked back to the lodge together, and Quinn felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope for a future that included more than just survival. The next morning, Quinn and Galena requested an audience with Running Elk. The old man received them in his lodge with gentle rain sitting beside him. Both looked grave, as if they already knew what was coming. Quinn had rehearsed what he wanted to say, but when the moment came, the words flew out of his head. He started and stopped several times, acutely aware of how clumsy his speech must sound. Finally, Running Elk held up a hand. "Let me speak," he said in careful English. "I am old, but I am not blind. I have seen the way you look at my daughter, and I have seen the way she looks at you. This is not a surprise." "Father," Galena started, but he waved her to silence. "Galena Brighthawk, you are my daughter and I love you. I want you to be happy, but I also want you to be safe, to be with your people. This man," he looked at Quinn, "he is good, kind. He saved your life. But he is not Arapaho. A life together would be hard, maybe impossible." "I know this," Galena said quietly, "but I also know my heart, and my heart has chosen." Running Elk sighed heavily. He looked tired, older than his years. "The world is changing," he said. "Our way of life is ending. The white men take more land every year. Soon there will be nowhere left for us to go. Our children will grow up on reservations, forgetting the old ways. This is the truth, painful as it is." "I know," Galena whispered. "But perhaps," Running Elk continued, "in this changing world there is room for new ways, new bridges between peoples." He turned his gaze to Quinn. "Quinn Yates, if you wish to court my daughter, to be with her, I will not forbid it, but I have conditions." Quinn's heart was hammering. "Anything, sir? You must stay here with us for at least one full turn of the seasons. A year. You must learn our ways, become part of our people, not just as a visitor, but truly become one of us. If at the end of that year you both still wish to be together, and if the people accept you, then you will have my blessing. But if you cannot commit to this, then you must leave now and not come back." Quinn looked at Galena. Her eyes were wide, hopeful but fearful. A year. He'd be giving up his old life completely, becoming part of a people he'd only known for a few weeks. It was terrifying. It was also the easiest decision he'd ever made. "I accept," Quinn said. "I'll stay, I'll learn, I'll prove myself worthy of her and of your trust." Gentle Rain smiled and Running Elk nodded slowly. Good, then it is decided. From this day you are not a visitor, Quinn Yates. You are one of us, learning to walk our path. We will see where the spirits lead. Galena's hand found Quinn's and he squeezed it gently. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, maybe even failures. But they would face it together. The year that followed was the hardest and the best of Quinn's life. He threw himself into learning everything he could about Arapaho life. The language came slowly, but he was determined. He learned to hunt with a bow as well as a rifle, to track game through different seasons, to read the land and the sky. He helped with the daily work of the camp, hauling water, gathering firewood, repairing lodges. Some people in the camp were welcoming, appreciating his genuine effort to fit in. Others were more reserved, keeping their distance. Quinn couldn't blame them. He represented a people who had done terrible things and trust had to be earned. But Galena was always there, supporting him, encouraging him when he got frustrated or discouraged. Their courtship was careful, proper by Arapaho standards. They spent time together, but always with others around, always respecting the customs of her people. Quinn learned that in Arapaho culture, courtship could take years, with the couple getting to know each other slowly, building a foundation of friendship and respect before moving to anything more. It was different from what he'd known in the white world, but Quinn found he liked it. There was no rush, no pressure, just the steady building of something real and lasting. Winter turned to spring, and the camp moved to follow the game. Quinn learned how to dismantle and reconstruct lodges, how to pack everything the camp needed on travois pulled by horses. He learned the rhythms of nomadic life, so different from the fixed settlements he'd known. Spring turned to summer, and Quinn went on his first buffalo hunt with the men of the camp. It was exhilarating and terrifying, riding alongside the thundering herd, trying to bring down one of the massive animals with bow and arrow. He missed his first several tries, but eventually managed to bring down a young bull. The men whooped in approval, and that night, Quinn was honored at a feast celebrating the hunt. Summer turned to fall, and Quinn participated in his first sun dance ceremony. It was a profound spiritual experience, unlike anything he'd known in his sparse Christian upbringing. He didn't fully understand all of it, but he felt the power of it, the connection to something larger than himself. Fall turned to winter again, and the cycle continued. Quinn had been with the Arapaho for a full year, and he barely recognized himself from the man he'd been. He was stronger, more capable, more connected to the land and the people around him. He was also deeply, irrevocably in love with Galena. Their relationship had deepened over the months, growing from attraction into something profound. They knew each other's thoughts, could communicate with a glance. She was his partner in every sense of the word, his equal and his complement. And from the way she looked at him, Quinn knew she felt the same. As winter settled in again, Running Elk called Quinn to his lodge. The old man was frailer than he'd been a year ago, his illness taking a steady toll. But his mind was still sharp, and his eyes still saw everything. "It has been 1 year," Running Elk said. "You have kept your promise. You have learned our ways, become one of us. The people speak well of you. Even the warriors who doubted now call you friend." "I'm grateful for the chance I've been given," Quinn said. "You still wish to be with my daughter?" Running Elk asked. "More than anything," Quinn replied without hesitation. "I love her. I want to build a life with her, whatever that looks like." Running Elk nodded slowly. "And you understand that this life will not be easy, that you are choosing to tie yourself to a people who have an uncertain future." "I understand," Quinn said. "But I'm also choosing to tie myself to the woman I love. The rest we'll figure out together." "You have my blessing," Running Elk said. And more than that, you have my gratitude. You have made my daughter happy. You have brought hope to our camp in dark times. You are a good man, Quinn Yates. You honor us." Quinn felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." That evening, a council was called. The entire camp gathered, and Running Elk stood before them, leaning heavily on his walking stick. He spoke in Arapaho, his voice carrying across the circle. Quinn understood most of it now, his hard-won knowledge of the language allowing him to follow along. Running Elk spoke of Quinn's arrival, of how he had saved Galena's life. He spoke of the year that had passed, of Quinn's dedication to learning their ways, his respect for their people. He spoke of love and choice, and the bridges that could be built between different worlds. When he finished, he called Quinn and Galena to the center of the circle. They stood together, hands joined before the assembled people. "Do any here speak against this union?" Running Elk asked. There was silence. Even those who had been most skeptical of Quinn said nothing. Over the year, he had won them over, if not with his skill then with his genuine effort and respect. "Then it is decided," Running Elk said. "Galena Brighthawk and Quinn Yates are joined before the people and the spirits. What the Creator has brought together, let no one tear apart." The camp erupted in celebration. There was singing and dancing, and Quinn found himself pulled into the festivities. Galena stayed close to his side, her smile radiant. They were married now in the eyes of her people, and nothing had ever felt more right. The celebration continued late into the night. As it finally wound down, Galena led Quinn to a lodge that had been set up at the edge of the camp, decorated with beautiful beadwork and painted designs. Their lodge, where they would begin their life together. Inside, a fire burned low and furs were spread on the ground. It was warm and intimate, their first true privacy in all the time they'd known each other. Galena turned to face him, suddenly shy in a way he'd never seen her. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. Quinn cupped her face in his hands, looking into those eyes that had captured him from the start. "I have never been happier in my life." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, and she melted against him. It was a kiss full of promise of all the days and nights to come, of a future they would build together. When they finally pulled apart, Galena smiled up at him. "I love you, Quinn Yates, my husband, my heart." "I love you too, Galena," Quinn replied, "more than words can say." They settled together on the furs, holding each other close, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams. Outside, the camp was finally quiet, everyone else asleep. But in their lodge, Quinn and Galena were just beginning their journey together. The months after the wedding were some of the happiest of Quinn's life. He and Galena fell into an easy rhythm, working together to maintain their lodge, hunt for food, and contribute to the camp. Marriage to Galena was everything Quinn had hoped and more. She was his partner in every way, challenging him, supporting him, loving him with a fierce devotion that left him breathless. As winter turned to spring, Galena began to suspect she was pregnant. Gentle rain confirmed it, and the news filled Quinn with a joy he'd never experienced. He was going to be a father. They were going to have a child together, a physical manifestation of their love. Running Elk was delighted at the news of a grandchild on the way, though his health continued to decline. He spent most days resting in his lodge now, too weak to do much more than sit and talk. Quinn visited him often, and they had long conversations about life, about the old ways and the new ways, about the future that was coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. "Take care of her," Running Elk said to Quinn one spring afternoon, "and take care of your child. The world they will grow up in will be even harder than the one we know now. They will need to be strong." "I will," Quinn promised. "I'll protect them with my life." "I know you will," Running Elk said, patting Quinn's hand with his own weathered one. "You are a good husband, a good son. I am glad Galena found you." 2 weeks later, Running Elk passed away in his sleep, Gentle Rain beside him. The camp mourned deeply. He had been a wise leader, a good man, and his loss was felt by everyone. Quinn grieved too, surprised by the depth of his sorrow. In the year and a half he'd known Running Elk, the old man had become like a father to him, the father he'd never had growing up. They honored Running Elk with proper ceremonies, and the camp felt emptier without his steady presence. But life went on, as it always did. The baby grew inside Galena, and Quinn found himself marveling at the changes in her body, the evidence of the life they'd created together. Summer came, hot and dry. The camp moved to their summer hunting grounds, and Galena, now heavily pregnant, rode carefully on her horse. Quinn worried about her, but she assured him she was fine, that Arapaho women had been having babies for generations and knew what they were doing. In late August, as the heat of summer was just beginning to break, Galena went into labor. Quinn was banished from their lodge, sent away by Gentle Rain and the other women who gathered to help. He paced outside with Swift Arrow, who found his anxiety amusing. "This is normal," Swift Arrow said. "Women have been doing this forever." "I know," Quinn said, "but it's different when it's your wife." Swift Arrow smiled. "Mourning Dove is also pregnant. I will be in your place soon enough." They waited together as the sun moved across the sky. Quinn could hear sounds from the lodge, Galena's breathing, the low murmurs of the women helping her. It seemed to take forever, but finally, as the sun was setting, he heard it. The sharp, piercing cry of a newborn baby. Gentle Rain emerged from the lodge, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A strong, healthy boy, and Galena is well. Come and meet him." Quinn nearly ran into the lodge. Galena was lying on the furs, sweaty and exhausted but radiating joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and as Quinn knelt beside them, he got his first look at his son. He was perfect, tiny and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably darken further as he grew. He had Galena's nose, Quinn thought, and maybe his jaw. But mostly he was just himself, a new person, their child. "Hello," Quinn whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers curled around his thumb, and Quinn felt his heart break open with love. "Hello, little one." "What should we name him?" Galena asked, her voice tired but happy. They had discussed names over the months, trying to find something that would honor both their cultures. "What about Thomas?" Quinn suggested. "It was my grandfather's name on my mother's side, and in Arapaho, maybe something that speaks to his strength." Galena thought for a moment. "Thomas Walking Bear," she said, "for your grandfather and for the strength to walk between two worlds." "Thomas Walking Bear Yates," Quinn said, testing how it sounded. "I like it. What do you think, little one? You like your name?" Thomas responded by yawning, his tiny face scrunching up adorably. Galena laughed, and Quinn kissed her forehead, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "For him, for everything. For being my wife, my partner. I love you so much." "I love you too," Galena replied. "We made a beautiful child." They had indeed. And as Quinn settled beside his wife and son, he felt a contentment he'd never known before. This was family. This was home. Not a place, but the people he loved. The next few months were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Thomas was a good baby overall, but he still needed constant attention, and both Quinn and Galena were sleep-deprived and overwhelmed. The camp rallied around them, as they did for all new parents. Gentle Rain was an invaluable help, as was Mourning Dove, who was learning in preparation for her own baby coming in the spring. Quinn loved being a father. He loved holding his son, watching him grow and change almost daily. He loved the way Thomas would focus on his face, those dark eyes seeming to recognize him. He loved making Galena laugh by talking to Thomas in a mixture of English and Arapaho, telling him stories about his parents and the adventures they'd had. As fall arrived and Thomas grew stronger, the camp faced a new challenge. Word came from scouts that the army was in the area, looking for camps that had left the reservation. There was talk of forced relocations, of arrests for anyone who resisted. The camp gathered for a council to decide what to do. Some wanted to return to the reservation to avoid conflict. Others wanted to keep moving to stay free as long as possible. The debate was heated, and Quinn stayed quiet, knowing this wasn't his decision to make. These were Galena's people, and whatever they chose, he would support. Finally, the council decided to move further into the mountains, to a remote area where they hoped to avoid detection. It was a risk, but so was returning to the reservation, where they knew food was scarce and conditions were harsh. The camp packed up and moved over several days, traveling into rougher country. Quinn helped however he could, while also taking care of Thomas so Galena could focus on packing their lodge and belongings. It was hard travel with a baby, but Thomas was a trooper, sleeping in a cradle board on Galena's back most of the time. They found a sheltered valley deep in the mountains and set up camp. It was beautiful but isolated, and Quinn worried about the coming winter. Still, the people were determined, and they worked together to prepare, hunting and gathering as much as they could before the snow came. Winter arrived early and harsh. The camp hunkered down, focusing on survival. Quinn kept busy hunting when the weather allowed, adding his rifle to the hunter's arsenal. His skill with a gun was valued, even as he continued to improve with bow and arrow. Thomas thrived despite the harsh conditions, growing into a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone. He was the camp's joy, a symbol of hope and new life. Other babies were born that winter too, including Mourning Dove's daughter, and the children were celebrated and cherished. Spring came eventually, as it always did, and the camp made it through with no losses. They had survived the winter free, and there was a sense of pride and accomplishment in that. But they also knew it couldn't last forever. The army was relentless, and eventually they would be found. It happened in early summer. Soldiers rode into the valley, led by a scout who tracked them. The camp was surrounded before they even knew what was happening. Quinn's heart sank as he saw the blue uniforms, the rifles pointed at them. An officer rode forward, his face hard. "This camp is in violation of the treaty," he called out in English. "You need to return to the reservation immediately. Anyone who resists will be arrested." Swift Arrow translated for those who didn't speak English. The people stood in angry, frightened silence. This was it. Their freedom was over. Quinn stepped forward, his mind racing. He spoke English, could communicate with the soldiers. Maybe he could help negotiate, find a way to make this less traumatic. "Sir," Quinn called out, "these people aren't causing any trouble. They're just trying to live." The officer's eyes narrowed as he looked at Quinn. "Who are you?" "My name is Quinn Yates. I'm married to one of the women here. We have a child. These are peaceful people. They'll come back to the reservation. There's no need for violence." The officer considered this. "You're white," he said, as if Quinn hadn't noticed. "I am," Quinn agreed. "And I'm telling you, these people will cooperate. Just give us time to pack up properly to make the journey safely, please." Something in Quinn's tone must have reached the officer. He sighed, looking suddenly tired. "You have 2 days," he said. "Pack up, prepare for the journey, but if anyone tries to run, I will hunt them down." "Understood, understood," Quinn said. "Thank you." The soldiers set up camp outside the valley, keeping watch but not interfering as the Arapaho began to pack up their lives. It was a somber process. everyone knowing that this time they wouldn't be able to leave again. This was the end of their freedom. Galena cried that night, holding Thomas close. "I wanted better for him," she said. "I wanted him to know what it was like to be free." "He will," Quinn promised. "Maybe not like you knew it, but we'll find a way. We'll teach him the old ways, keep them alive. And maybe someday things will change. Maybe someday people will understand." "You really believe that?" Galena asked. "I have to," Quinn said. "Otherwise, what's the point?" They held each other through the night, taking comfort in their closeness. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter, a harder one, but they would face it together. The journey to the reservation took a week. It was a hard trek, the soldiers setting a punishing pace. But Quinn, Galena, and the others kept up, determined to show their strength even in defeat. Thomas traveled in his cradleboard, mostly sleeping, blissfully unaware of the momentous change happening around him. The reservation was a shock. Quinn had heard stories, but seeing it in person was different. Rows of rough cabins, dusty streets, people sitting idle because there was no work, nothing to hunt. The government rations were supposed to feed them, but Quinn quickly learned they were inadequate and often late. People were thin, hungry, defeated, but they were also resilient. The camp that had been forced here found places to set up, reunited with family members they'd been separated from, and began the process of adapting to this new reality. It wasn't the life they wanted, but it was the life they had. Quinn and Galena were given a small cabin, barely more than a shack. It was drafty and cramped, nothing like the spacious lodge they'd had. But it was shelter, and they made it a home. Quinn managed to find work at the agency office, using his ability to speak both English and Arapaho to serve as a translator. It wasn't what he'd envisioned for his life, but it paid a small wage that helped supplement the inadequate rations. The months on the reservation were hard. Quinn struggled with his frustration at the injustice of it all, the way the Arapaho were treated as children, their every move controlled. Galena struggled with the loss of freedom, the inability to ride and hunt and live as she'd always known. But they had each other, and they had Thomas. Their son grew and thrived, learning to crawl and then to walk. His first word was a mixture of Arapaho and English that made both his parents laugh. He was their joy, their reminder of why they had to keep going. Gentle Rain lived with them, and her presence was a blessing. She helped care for Thomas, cooked meals that stretched their rations as far as possible, and kept their spirits up with her stories and her steady faith that the spirits would see them through. A year passed on the reservation, then two. It was a hard life, but Quinn and Galena found moments of happiness. They had another child, a daughter they named Sarah Soaring Eagle, who had Quinn's green eyes and Galena's fierce spirit. Thomas became a big brother, protective and proud. Quinn worked hard at the agency, gaining a reputation as an honest translator who tried to advocate for fair treatment. It didn't always work. The bureaucracy was massive and often uncaring, but he did what he could. Galena found purpose in teaching the children of the reservation, both Arapaho and English, trying to ensure they didn't lose their language and culture while also preparing them for the white man's world they'd have to navigate. Life on the reservation would never be what they'd had before, but Quinn and Galena built something meaningful there. They were leaders in their community, respected and loved. Their home was always open, always welcoming to those who needed help or just someone to talk to. As Thomas grew older, Quinn taught him everything he could about both worlds. He taught him to shoot, to track, to survive in the wilderness. Galena taught him Arapaho traditions, stories, songs. They wanted him to understand where he came from, to be proud of his heritage even in a world that often told him to be ashamed. 5 years after arriving at the reservation, Quinn and Galena welcomed another child, a son they named Samuel, Running Stream. He was a quiet baby, thoughtful and observant, different from his boisterous brother and sister. The cabin was crowded with 3 children, but it was full of love. Gentle Rain passed away peacefully in her sleep when Samuel was 2. She'd lived a long life, seen many changes, and faced them all with grace. Her death was mourned by the entire community, and Quinn grieved the loss of the woman who had become like a mother to him. But life continued, as it always did. Thomas grew into a strong, capable young man, comfortable in both Arapaho and white culture. Sarah was fierce and independent, already showing signs of her mother's strength. Samuel was the peacemaker, the one who brought harmony wherever he went. Quinn and Galena grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had been through so much, survived things that should have broken them, but they'd only grown stronger. Their marriage was a partnership in the truest sense, built on respect, trust, and a love that had weathered every storm. One evening, as they sat outside their cabin watching the sunset, Thomas came to them. He was 20 now, a man grown, and he had news. "I've been accepted to the Indian training school in Carlisle," he said, his expression a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "I want to go. I want to learn to get an education, but I also don't want to leave you." Quinn looked at Galena, and they had an entire conversation in that single glance. They'd known this was coming. Thomas was too smart, too ambitious to be confined to the reservation forever. He needed to spread his wings. "You should go," Galena said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "You should learn, grow, see the world. We will be here when you come back." "And you will come back," Quinn added. "Remember where you come from, who you are, but don't be afraid to become who you're meant to be." Thomas hugged them both, and Quinn felt the bittersweet ache of watching a child leave home. But he was also proud, so incredibly proud of the man his son had become. Thomas left for Carlisle the next month, and the cabin felt emptier without him. But letters came regularly, and Thomas was thriving. He was learning, making connections, preparing for a future that his parents could only dream of. Sarah followed her own path, becoming a teacher like her mother, working with the younger children on the reservation. Samuel, when he was old enough, became a healer, learning from the medicine men and combining traditional Arapaho medicine with what he could learn from the reservation doctor. Quinn and Galena watched their children grow and thrive, and they knew they had done something right. They had raised children who were proud of their heritage, capable of navigating multiple worlds, strong enough to face whatever challenges came their way. Years continued to pass. Thomas returned from Carlisle and began working for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, using his position to advocate for better treatment of native peoples. Sarah married a good man from a neighboring tribe and started her own family. Samuel continued his healing work, respected by everyone who knew him. Quinn and Galena became grandparents multiple times over, their cabin always full of visiting children and grandchildren. They told stories, passed down traditions, and served as the anchors of their growing family. On their 20th anniversary, Quinn and Galena took a trip. They got permission to leave the reservation for a few days and rode out to the Wind River Valley where they'd first met, where he'd given her his last blanket and changed both their lives forever. The valley was mostly unchanged, still beautiful and wild. They made camp in the spot where their old camp used to be, and they talked late into the night, remembering everything they'd been through. "You regret it?" Quinn asked as they lay under the stars. "Tying your life to mine, you could have married an Arapaho man, had an easier life." Galena propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with those eyes that still made his heart skip. "You are an Arapaho man," she said firmly, "in all the ways that matter. And there is nothing easy about love, Quinn Yates, but there is also nothing more worthwhile. I have never regretted choosing you, not for a single moment." Quinn pulled her down for a kiss, and it was still electric after all these years, still full of promise and passion and love. They made love under the stars, in the place where their story began, and it felt like coming full circle. They returned to the reservation refreshed, recommitted to each other and to their family. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Quinn's hair went gray, and Galena's face gained lines that spoke of a life well lived. But they were still them, still partners, still deeply in love. When Quinn was in his 60s, the reservation finally began to see some improvements. New policies, pushed in part by advocates like Thomas, brought better rations, more autonomy, opportunities for education and economic development. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was better. Quinn retired from the agency office, and he and Galena spent their days surrounded by family. They had 7 grandchildren by then, with more on the way. Their cabin had been expanded multiple times to accommodate the growing family, and there was always someone there, always laughter and noise and life. One spring evening, as Quinn sat on the porch watching the sunset, Galena came and sat beside him. She took his hand, her fingers still slender and strong despite her age. "We have had a good life," she said quietly. "The best," Quinn agreed. "I would not change anything," Galena continued. "Not the hard parts, not the sad parts, all of it brought us here to this moment." Quinn looked at her, this woman who had been his whole world for over 40 years. She was still beautiful to him, still the most amazing person he'd ever known. "I love you," he said, as he had 1,000 times before. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I know," Galena said, smiling, "and I love you the same." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Inside the cabin, their grandchildren were playing, their children were cooking dinner, and the air was full of the sounds of family, of life, of love. Quinn thought back to that frozen night so many years ago when he'd given his last blanket to a dying woman. He'd thought he was making a sacrifice, giving up his chance at survival. But really, he'd been receiving a gift, the greatest gift of his life. Galena had come back with an unexpected offer. Love, family, purpose, a life richer than anything he'd imagined. She'd given him a home, not a place, but a feeling, a sense of belonging he'd never had before. And in return, Quinn had given her his whole heart, his loyalty, his partnership. Together, they'd built something beautiful, something lasting. They'd raised children who were strong and proud, who carried both their heritages with honor. They'd survived poverty and injustice and loss, and they'd done it together. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Quinn squeezed Galena's hand. She squeezed back, and no words were needed. They understood each other completely, the way only 2 people who have shared a life can. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Just as they had every day for the past 40-plus years, just as they would every day for however much time they had left. Their story had begun with an act of kindness in the frozen wilderness. It had blossomed into a love that had weathered every storm, overcome every obstacle. And it would end someday, as all stories must, but not today. Today, Quinn and Galena Yates were alive together, surrounded by the family and community they'd built. And that, Quinn thought as he sat on the porch with his wife's hand in his, was more than enough. It was everything.